Hello. We are live, and this afternoon I'm going to sort of randomly attack the concept of minority rule by Nicholas Nassim Taleb and compare it to my father's chapter on minority tactics in Israel, the Two Halves of the Nation. So again, I am intrigued by everything that I have read of Nassim Taleb's. I think it's he's describing a phenomenon that is very real, that even a very small minority of around 3% could change everything, using presumably some kind of tactics, but maybe these aren't the same tactics that my father was talking about when he spoke about minority tactics. So I think that my father and Nassim Taleb have a lot in common. They are both men of the Levant. They both hail from Carthaginian and Phoenician roots, and they both are good at mathematical modeling of various social phenomena. So I am not that good at those things, and I'm struggling with these issues, and that's why I want to talk about this. But first of all, let's look at a little bit at Nassim Taleb's version of the minority rule. I'm going to try to screen share that, and I'll try to come back to, which is not something I am able to do always. So this is where we are. For those of you who are interested, it's the address, the URL here is Fooled by Randomness Minority PDF, and you can download it yourself. And I assume that this is with the permission of Nassim Nicholas Taleb that we are all looking at this. So this is actually a chapter, and the chapter is called The Most Intolerant Wins, the Dominance of the Stubborn Minority. Okay? So let's just start reading this. And of course, we're not going to read the whole thing. It's just to get our feet wet. So the best example I know, he says, Nassim Taleb says, the best example I know that gives insights into the functioning of complex system is with the following situation. It suffices for an intransigent minority, a certain type of intransigent minorities, to reach a minutely small level, say 3 or 4% of the total population, for the entire population to have to submit to their preferences. Further, an optical illusion comes with the dominance of the minority. A naive observer would be under the impression that the choices and preferences are those of the majority. If it seems absurd, it is because our scientific intuitions aren't calibrated for that. And I'm going to skip through here. So now I'm in the second paragraph. The main idea behind complex systems is that the ensemble behaves in a way not predicted by the components. The interactions matter more than the nature of the units. Studying individual ants will never, one can safely say never for most such situations, never give us an idea about how the colony operates. For that, one needs to understand an ant colony as an ant colony, no less, no more, not a collection of ants. This is called an emergent property of the whole, by which parts and whole differ, because what matters is the interactions between such parts. And interactions can obey very simple rules. The rule we discuss in this chapter is the minority rule. Okay, and I'm going to skip around a little in the chapter because we're not going to read the whole thing. He's talking about why there's so much kosher food in a population where the people who are Jewish Orthodox are a minority. He talks about the peanut allergy. Here's figure 4, renormalization groups, steps 1 through 3. Figure 2 shows 4 boxes exhibiting what is called fractal self-similarity. Each box contains 4 smaller boxes. Each one of the 4 boxes will contain 4 boxes. And so all the way down and all the way up until we reach a certain level. There are 2 colors, yellow for the majority choice and pink for the minority one. Assume the smaller unit contains 4 people, a family of 4. One of them is the intransigent minority and eats only non-GMO food, which includes organic. The color of the box is pink and the others yellow. We renormalize once as we move up. The stubborn daughter manages to impose her rule on 4, and the unit is now all pink. Will opt for non-GMO. Now, step 3, you have the family going to a barbecue party attended by 3 other families. As they are known to only eat non-GMO, the guests will cook only organic. The local grocery store, realizing the neighborhood is only non-GMO, switches to non-GMO to simplify life, which impacts the local wholesaler, and the story continues and renormalizes. Okay, so now this is without talking about, what any of the arguments are for or against GMO. This is just a very, okay, and here's the veto. Let's talk about the veto. The fact we saw from the renormalization group, the veto effect a person in a group can steer choices. Rory Sutherland suggests that this explains why some fast food chains, such as McDonald's, thrive, not because they offer a great product, but because they are not vetoed in a certain socioeconomic group and by a small proportion of people in that group at that. To put it in technical terms, it was a best worst case divergence from expectations, a lower variance and lower mean. When there are few choices, McDonald's appears to be a safe bet. It is also a safe bet in shady places with few regulars where the food variance from expectation can be consequential. And then he talks about lingua franca. If a meeting is taking place in Germany and the Teutonic-looking conference room of a corporation that is sufficiently international or European, and one of the persons in the room doesn't speak German, the entire meeting will be run in English, the brand of inelegant English used in corporations across the world. That way, they can equally offend their Teutonic ancestors and the English language. It all started with the asymmetrical rule that those who are non-native in English know bad English, but the reverse, English speakers knowing other languages is less likely. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing at this point so that I can talk to you a little bit. And now I have to find my live event and find out whether I'm still here. Let me go over here and see if I can share this someplace else so that here it is. This someplace else so that okay, so here I am. I'm looking at it on my other computer, and I'm going to share this on Twitter. And I'm also going to share it on Facebook. Okay, now I can see myself. And I am going to still allude to things in Nassim Taleb's book without necessarily showing all of them to you. You have a link so you can look at all of that. So the question is, my question really isn't, is that true? I know that's true. I'm planning a trip to Israel and I'm going with my daughter, and my daughter and I speak Hebrew. I didn't want anybody to tag along on our trip who is not a speaker of Hebrew, because I want my daughter to have the experience of speaking Hebrew with the people we meet. But if we had, as a member of our group, a person who does not speak Hebrew, everybody would switch to English. And that would even include if there was a Chinese person with us. Let's say there was a Chinese person with us, and nobody speaks Mandarin in our group of Israeli friends. And if the Chinese person didn't speak Hebrew, then in order to be polite to the Chinese person in our party, everybody would switch to English. Why? Because English is the lingua franca. And how did it become the lingua franca? Well, it's a long story, but according to Nassim Taleb, it has something to do with the fact that people who speak English are more often monolinguals than people who speak other languages. So it's actually because of the intransigence of the English speakers in any party that everybody else has to speak English. So he says, we can thus get some intuition on how the emergence of lingua franca languages can come from minority rules, and that is a point that is not visible to linguists. Aramaic is a Semitic language which succeeded Canaanite, that is Phoenician Hebrew, in the Levant and resembles Arabic. It was the language Jesus Christ spoke. The reason it came to dominate the Levant and Egypt isn't because of any particular imperial Semitic power or the fact that they have interesting noses. It was the Persians, who speak an Indo-European language, who spread Aramaic, the language of Assyria, Syria, and Babylon. Persians taught Egyptians a language that was not their own. Simply, when the Persians invaded Babylon, they found an administration with scribes who could only use Aramaic and didn't know Persian, so Aramaic became the state language. Okay, so that's an example of a linguistic point. And then he goes on and talks about asymmetrical rules about who can marry whom. And I want to read you from this, and then I want to pop over to my father's idea about minority tactics. So at this point, if you're following along on Nassim Taleb's site, I am on page, well, I guess I'm on page 34, second paragraph. The two asymmetric rules are as follows. First, if a non-Muslim man under the rule of Islam marries a Muslim woman, he needs to convert to Islam. And if either parents of a child happens to be Muslim, the child will be Muslim. Second, becoming Muslim is irreversible, as apostasy is the heaviest crime under the religion, sanctioned by the death penalty. Okay, so once you convert in, you can never convert out. Okay? The famous Egyptian actor Omar Sharif, born Mikhail Dmitry Shalhoub, was of Lebanese Christian origins. He converted to Islam to marry a famous Egyptian actress and had to change his name to an Arabic one. He later divorced but did not revert to the faith of his ancestors. Under these two asymmetric rules, one can do simple simulations and see how a small Islamic group occupying Christian Coptic Egypt can lead over the centuries to the Copts becoming a tiny minority. Okay, I don't want to get into that any further. You can read the entire article. I've provided the link. Now, the thing that worries me about that is not, I mean, the facts are the facts. His facts, the facts that Nassim Taleb states are correct. His math is correct. His calculations are correct. So what am I worried about? I'm worried about any conclusions that we draw from this. Now, I have always thought that I was on the side of tolerance, and I still think I am primarily on the side of tolerance. What I mean is I don't want to impose my views on other people, and I don't want other people to impose theirs on me. And so I have a sort of live and let live philosophy, which goes well with libertarianism. And in any country that I live in, what I would like to see is that kind of tolerance. Not the kind of tolerance that allows other people to go around and impose their rules on me, but the kind of tolerance that allows every person to choose his own way in life. Okay? And so I'm very much against government intervention in religion, and I believe in the First Amendment in the United States and separation of church and state in all societies that I would want to live in. I'm not saying that I want to impose my will on societies where I'm not a party to them. I mean, if they want to have a different kind of thing, like a religious enclave where the religious rules are applied, that's fine, but I don't want to be a part of that. Okay? All right, so that's my outlook on things. And so when it came to Israel, we thought that the Canaanite way of looking at things would be the best way, because the ancient religions, the ones that came before Judaism, before Christianity, and before Islam, were extremely tolerant. They allowed each person to worship as many gods or as few gods as they wanted, and they did not impose their religion on other people. But there's something about Nassim Taleb's, what he's been saying, that seems to imply that he's not in favor of the live and let live philosophy. And I'm just going to tell you that if you will go to my Instagram, I believe it's on my Instagram that I shared or it might have been on my Twitter. Anyway, yeah. Yes, on my Instagram, I did share Popper's Paradox from this same chapter by Nassim Taleb, and I can read it to you really quickly. As I'm writing these lines, and this is Nassim Taleb saying, people are disputing whether the freedom of the enlightened West can be undermined by the intrusive policies that would be needed to fight Salafi fundamentalists. Clearly, can democracy, by definition the majority, tolerate enemies? The question is as follows. Would you agree to deny the freedom of speech to every political party that has in its charter the banning of the freedom of speech? Let's go one step further. Should a society that has elected to be tolerant be intolerant about intolerance? This is, in fact, the incoherence that Kurt Gödel, the Grandmaster of Logical Rigor, detected in the Constitution while taking the naturalization exam. Legend has it that Gödel started arguing with the judge, and Einstein, who was his witness during the process, saved him. I wrote about people with logical flaws asking me if one should be skeptical about skepticism. I used a similar answer as Popper when he was asked if one could falsify falsification. We can answer these points using the minority rule. Yes, an intolerant minority can control and destroy democracy. Actually, as we saw, it will eventually destroy our world. So we need to be more than intolerant with some intolerant minorities. It is not permissible to use American values or Western principles in treating intolerant Salafism, which denies other people's right to have their own religion. The West is currently in the process of committing suicide. Okay, I find something about this to be very disturbing. But I don't know the answer, and I'm not saying I know the answer. So now I want to share with you my father's chapter 4, Minority Tactics. So this is my father's book, Israel, the Two Halves of the Nation. My father's name is Amnon Katz, and I'm going to read you at least the synopsis, but probably a little bit more. Chapter 4, Minority Tactics. Synopsis. This chapter explores the Jewish defensive attitude toward proselytizing. The Zionist movement and the Hebrew settlement retained this losing attitude and considered anyone who converted out of Judaism as alienated permanently and irreversibly. So that's kind of the opposite of Islam, okay? In Islam, once you convert to Islam, you can't convert out. But in Judaism, if you convert out, you can't go back. Something like that. You're gone. Okay. It had become taboo to encourage new converts into Judaism or to attempt to recover individuals and communities who had converted out. The few in the stable Arabic-speaking population who retained the Jewish religion were absorbed. The others were written off. This attitude was most curious in view of the unreligious character of the Hebrew settlement. Failing to shake off this Jewish taboo, the Hebrew settlement turned its back on half the nation it had set out to revive and gave up the most effective method of dealing with its demographic and social problems. Okay, the numbers game. This is section 1. Unlike any Jewish community in the world, the Hebrew settlement laid claim to the land. It sought to name the country, dictate its language, and define its identity. In light of these goals, it was a source of embarrassment and frustration that the settlement was a minority in the land it claimed. Even at its finest hour in 1947, it was only 614,000 in a total population of 1.9 million, according to the Encyclopedia Hebraica. The Jewish population of Europe before the Holocaust is estimated at about 11 million. If Herzl's dream of transplanting them all to Palestine could have been realized, they would have overwhelmed the native population. Needless to say, they would have also overwhelmed the country and caused an environmental disaster. There was never any need to worry about this prospect. It was quite unrealistic. Even at times when immigration was unrestricted, ascenders were only a trickle. Over the years of British rule, this flow amounted to 1/1000th of world Jewish population each year. Meantime, improvements in medical technology reduced infant mortality among the Arabic-speaking population, and it caused higher birth rate to translate into a surge of population. You see, it used to be that higher birth rate had nothing to do with more population. It was just to keep up with infant mortality. Improved general conditions in Palestine may have attracted Arab immigrants from the neighboring countries, but Arab is in parentheses. These changes, for which the Hebrew settlement liked to claim credit, worked against it in numerical balance. It doubled the so-called Arab population from 600,000 at the turn of the century to 1,200,000 in 1947. Even so, until 1939, the percentage of the settlement in the population of Palestine rose steadily, and its leaders were waiting impatiently for the day when it would be in the majority. In the meantime, there was no choice except to play minority tactics. Majority rule, not surprisingly, works in favor of the majority. Minorities that seek to maintain separate identities and the sectarian leadership of such minorities favor systems of quotas. The settlement demanded and maintained sectarian autonomy within Palestine. Most embarrassing was a British proposal in 1936 to establish an elective advisory council in Palestine. This was to be a first step in preparing the country for self-rule. The Zionist leadership rejected this initiative. Luckily for it, the leaders of the Arab National Movement rejected it as well. They felt it was too moderate and independence projected in 10 years was too distant. Conveniently for the settlement, that proposal fell through. Okay, I'm going to now go on to section 2. This is all a bit full of numbers, and I just wanted to talk about how minority rule relates to minority strategy. Okay, so loser strategy. That's section 2 of this chapter, the chapter being minority tactics. Being a minority does impose certain tactical limitations, but in the long run, aggressive, self-confident minorities can and do become majorities. The spread of the Christian faith is a case in point. From a little-known and persecuted minority, it has risen to dominate Western culture. Judaism, too, had its days of vision and expansion. In the early centuries, when the time for monotheism was ripe, Judaism did chalk a country or two to its credit. The king of Khosar in the Caucasus adopted Judaism en masse by royal decree. So did the kingdom of Hybar in southern Arabia. The first of these is the origin of a sizable section of East European Jewry and accounts for their Caucasian features. The second is the source of the Jewish community of Yemen, which in the early 50s migrated en masse to Israel. This population stands apart as a distinct South Arabian racial group. By and large, however, Christianity and Islam were the winners of the proselytizing competition. Judaism remained and also ran. As this situation stabilized, the incentives grew to join the winners. The Jewish community started to lose some of their members. It is hard to trace the extent of this trend. Individual, well-known cases stand out. Benjamin Disraeli, prime minister who founded the empire, was a Christian, the son of a converted Jew. So was the founding father of communism, Karl Marx. No doubt the elder Disraeli and the elder Marx were not unique. Many others of their contemporaries had converted, but their offspring did not achieve equal notoriety. Between the half of the thriving Jewish community of Spain that preferred Christianity to expulsion in 1500 and individual families that trickled out over the centuries, Judaism was a steady loser in the population balance. It is not surprising, then, that the Jewish community adopted extreme defensive attitudes. The converted were mourned as dead and cut off from any contact. This was in direct contradiction to Jewish religious doctrine that does not recognize conversion out. Once a Jew is always a Jew, and a Jew who has sinned is a renegade Jew. This winner's policy is still set in the religious law. But the Jewish community was now a community of losers. They felt that any intercourse worked in their disfavor. The mere act of proselytizing in either direction became subject to a powerful taboo. Missionaries were referred to as inciters and seducers. The winners of the competition welcomed free exchange and flow, confident it would work in their favor. The losers, for the same reason, sought to restrict intercourse and freeze all persons into their existing religious denominations. In this way, they were able to stem the outflow to a trickle and extend their spiritual existence indefinitely. At the same time, they were giving up the chance of ever again becoming winners. Okay, I don't know to what extent Nassim Taleb takes cognizance of whether you are a winner or a loser as to this issue of minority rule. It's not enough to be intransigent. You also have to know which way it's going. And that's, I think, part of what I'm confused about. Okay, I'm going to page 75 here in My Father's Minority Tactics. He said, in ancient times, the domain of gods was territorial. It was this local nature of deities that Ruth the Moabite, great-grandmother of King David, migrating with her mother-in-law to Israel, acknowledged when she declared, "Your God is my God." However, in the Babylonian exile, the Jewish community, deprived of territory, changed the concept of Jehovah's inheritance into one of hereditary ethnicity. The main elements of a universal religion fell in place during the Second Temple, but the ethnic barrier was still a major incompatible element. Jesus Christ himself was originally subject to this hang-up. Asked to heal the daughter of a woman of Canaan, Jesus refused, stating that his practice was only for Jews. "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel," were his words. He further elaborated, "It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs." She pointed out that even the dogs are entitled to the crumbs under the table. Jesus relented and healed the woman's daughter, whom he conceded the status of a dog under the table. Okay, so here's the question. Are we always going to be afraid of intolerant minorities? Or is it only intolerant minorities that don't adopt loser strategies that we have to be afraid of? I think that's the question. And at this point, I would like to see if we have any comments. If not, I will probably leave you with that question. Well, I don't see anything in chat, so I'm going to assume that there isn't anything. And I leave you with this. Is it always such a situation that if we have an intolerant minority, that intolerant minority is going to win? Or is it only intolerant minorities that don't adopt loser strategies? So here's an example of a potential intolerant minority that I was almost a part of. I joined the carnivore diet for a few months in the year 2018. Now, the carnivore diet is a very restrictive diet that basically has you eat the very best food, which is meat. And meat contains in it almost anything that you need. However, it is really hard to maintain a carnivore diet in the long run when you're part of society, when you want to celebrate holidays such as Thanksgiving in the United States. And in order to try to fit myself into society, I decided to be more tolerant, and I went on a campaign to try to find relatively close to carnivore diet, but not really carnivore desserts. And that turned out to be my downfall. And due to coming off the diet, I got very sick. And then I decided that I was not going to go back on the carnivore diet because I have a plan to visit Israel. And when I visit Israel, I don't want to be so restricted in my diet that I can't eat anything that is available there. Therefore, I am not currently on an all carnivore diet. If I ever go back on it, I was feeling very healthy on it, healthier than I am not on it. But there are social issues. If more and more people go on the carnivore diet until 3% of our population are carnivores and will not eat anything else except meat, will this cause the family gatherings at Thanksgiving to only have meat at them? Or will other people still continue to eat vegetables and bread and anything that's not made of meat? If we applied Nassim Taleb's minority rule and applied my father's minority tactics to this, what would the outcome be? Please leave your comments for me because I'm interested in what you might think about it. Thank you. I'll talk to you later.